You can also share it with other folks affiliated with the church. Please use it to your discretion. First of all, I appreciate being invited to do this. I accept that as an honor. We have undergone quite a journey at St. Christopher's. February of this coming year will mark my 5th anniversary there, which is really hard for me to even fathom that it has been that long. And we've had quite a journey, which you'll see in part in this PowerPoint presentation I put together. I apologize if the PowerPoint, if you're in a different version, it might come through not quite as clean as I intend it. But I will make sure that the most updated version is given to Sarah to pass on to you as well. In starting, and we will keep it right at an hour. I'm expected elsewhere at 8 o'clock with my wife, so I tend to try to stick to that when I am asked to. You know, the thing that jumps out at me immediately when it comes to this conversation is some of the words that our new Bishop Geoff Lee has said a number of times, and that is that in the world of church and other endeavors, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm a big believer in that. It really is true. We can come in with the best strategy in the world, but if we don't change the culture, we're really kind of dooming the strategy to the same result. And so I start off by urging you to think that way. I apologize in advance if I say something that sounds a little offensive. I've had to offend myself on a number of occasions in some of the things that I do and don't do. What works at St. Christopher's may not work exactly the same as anywhere else. Certainly the things that have worked for me at St. Christopher's are different than what we did at our startup mission church in Eagle River at St. Francis, which was different in turn from a very urban ministry at the Cathedral in Hartford, Connecticut. And so take it in due stride. But I do think that you'll find that the general principles of what we're talking about here will apply across the board. So I'm going to start the screen share here. And what I'm going to do is run you first, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. Then I'm going to show you our annual appeal that we did in 2021, and then the new one that we will be sending out. It's at the printers as we speak, that we will be sending out in a couple of weeks. And then we'll open it up for questions. But then when we're finished, I invite you to give me a call. I'm happy to talk to anyone individually. I do see this as a communal effort. We don't see this as intellectual property. If you have something that you like that we have, use it. We're happy to accommodate and help any of our partner parishes. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right, great. So the first order of business is to understand that this is really not just about a stewardship campaign. It really is about vitality planning. It has to be looked at that way. That's the first step into a cultural shift, is to understand that what we're really planning for is vitality. And it's a continuous stream. It goes from one year to the next. It goes from one decade to the next. Another phrase that I'll borrow from Geoff Lee, because I think he's full of great phrases, is that he talks about a seminary instructor that when somebody raised their hand and said, well, but church is really not a business, that he immediately came right back and said, of course it's a business. Hopefully it's much more. And that's the way I look at it as well. Of course it's a business. The evidence of that is that we're an incorporated entity and we have inflows and outflows of money. That by definition is business. And so part of this is really understanding how do we take the business of church, translate it into true, genuine vitality for the mission of the church. Because without vitality and without getting the business right, then what happens is we end up being like churches that have gone by the wayside and now there's really no mission at all. We're dedicated to not having that happen. So with that in mind, here's an interesting little cute cartoon. I love Peanuts comic strips, and Lucy says, you know what we're going to do tomorrow? Patty and Violet and I are going on a picnic. I just hope to goodness that it doesn't rain. And Linus, in his wisdom, says, of course, hoping to goodness is not theologically sound. It is also a terrible business plan. That's kind of where our head is on this. So the cultural change means that we have to back up away from just the idea of the annual appeal and the notion of stewardship into formation, real good, solid leadership formation. This is your vestry, this is your priest, this is anybody that has a leadership position. I'm going to show you our organizational chart. It's good to chart out what you have. You may find that you have more than you think just by charting it out. It starts with a whole notion of operational discipline, making sure that we avoid the 7 deadly words of the Episcopal Church. Oh, but we've always done it that way. Operational discipline calls us to always call that into question and to find out what ways could we do something that might be improved, that might lead to vitality, that might help us to lift up one another. The other thing is coming in with an attitude of gratitude. We're always thankful for what we have. We make sure that people know that we're thankful for what we have. I write handwritten thank you notes all the time. Every week, I write handwritten thank you notes. People appreciate that because then they know that it's genuine, coming from the heart, and it has to be coming from the heart. Otherwise, it's not a cultural shift. It's just kind of a cheap strategy. The other thing is the notion of tolerance versus embrace. And this one and the next point are 2 points that I brought up when I first came to St. Christopher's 5 years ago. In my head, I remember having my first interview at St. Christopher's face-to-face with about 11 people from the selection committee. And one of the interesting questions that I had was, they said, well, Father, how would you deal with, let's say, a difficult person? And I thought, that was an interesting question. And I said, well, the first order of business is that I have to admit upfront that I can be a difficult person. And in fact, am at times. We have to have that humility and grace of knowing that we're not coming in as the perfect ones. Our leaderships are not the perfect ones. We don't have a perfect template of history to lay over onto things going into the future. And that we need to embrace people for who they are. We all can be difficult and will be from time to time. It's not a reason to not embrace them. I, for one, do not see tolerance, for example, as a virtue. I see tolerance as an activity. Nobody, just to emphasize the point, I wouldn't want to be just tolerated by anybody. I want to be embraced for who I am. And there's a difference. And people know the difference. They know if you're just tolerating them. Well, when we talk about congregational vitality, then we're necessarily talking about embracing everyone, returning back to the Anglican core of understanding that we're a big tent. Everybody belongs. We just have to find ways that we can work effectively together to produce the vitality. And that gets with this concept of a car without rearview mirrors. In my prior life in the financial services business, our company had a relationship with Coach K. If you're not familiar with him, he's the Duke basketball coach, 6 rings, national championships. And he was also the coach for the US Olympic team, just a fabulous human being. And he talked about this idea of the car without rearview mirrors. He would deal every year with kids that would come to Duke to play basketball. They come off of a big star ride from, their prior high school. I'm sure they had all kinds of accolades and so on. They come in thinking that they're going to be God's gift to Duke basketball. He tells them immediately, this is a car with no rearview mirrors. You just rip them off. Everything we do looks into the windshield. Now, I say that, and he says that, not with disrespect for the past. I happen to relish the past. I love the history of the Episcopal Church and this diocese in particular, and so many things. But the idea of being a car without rearview mirrors means that we really force our attention on where we're going and not where we've been, because sometimes that can really get us stuck in the flat tire. And finally, the idea of healthy capacity. Healthy capacity means that you have people step up and do what they really can do, but you don't have them step in so hard that they burn out. When I first came to St. Christopher's, there was about 5 people really running everything, every committee. It was the same people. And so one of the rules that we lovingly instituted is to say that each of the ministries that we engage in, that a person can only run one of them. They can be on other ones, but they can only run one. And that was a little bit of a challenge. People had to make some choices. It was almost got down to rock, paper, scissors as to who's going to run this. And that's okay. And we're happy that we did that, because we now have a plethora of different names that are each doing different things. So healthy capacity is knowing when to help to engage someone so they really are engaged in meaningful ministry, but not so much that we're burning them out and all of a sudden they vanish. So here is our organizational chart. This is what St. Christopher's looks like. You'll see that I have it in a kind of a round shape. And this is something that I got from reading a book, and I commend this book to you. It's called Leading Like Francis. It is authored by a gentleman by the name of Carl Koch, who sadly has died since. He was a friend of ours at our ministry up in Minocqua, or Eagle River. He was from Minocqua. And it really talks very eloquently and very powerfully about servant leadership and the idea of everybody being a resource unto each other, as opposed to sort of the typical hierarchical pyramid style chart. And so we try to emulate this in everything we do. We try to make sure that everyone, whether it's flower ministry or caring ministry or the stewardship campaign or what have you, that they have a sense of autonomy, that we are all a resource to each other. When they ask me my opinion, it's not in terms of me telling them what to do. So the first order of business, once we've kind of got our head around the fact that we really need to be engaging congregational vitality as a matter of course, is to educate your people on the segmentation of revenues. When I came 5 years ago, it was all one slush fund. Everything kind of flowed through it. And there was a lot of question about finances, and and the next thing you know, people are holding back, don't want to put money in. It's important that people understand what different kinds of revenue sources do for a church organization. Primarily when it comes to the operating budget, that is the thing that keeps the trains running on time. That is coming from pledge and plate. It's important to have an intentional annual appeal for specifically that one item. I always look at that as saying, these are the things, operational budget, or these are the things that have to happen or we don't have an organization. We have to pay our people. You got to pay the light bill. You got to, to mow the grass, plow the driveway, all of those things. And it's lovely that people want to give a gift. And I have, as I'm sure you have heard many times, people say, well, I'm going to give this money, but I don't want it to go for operations. I always found that a very curious thing. And I love the fact that somebody wants to give money because they want to put in a stained glass window or they want to fix the parking lot. And those are really important things. The problem is that I have yet in my career so far to meet anyone who has a passion for the August light bill. It just doesn't happen. And so those things have to be paid and those things have to be said. Like I say, I've kind of predicated this by saying, if I say something that offends, I kind of partially apologize for it, but at the same time, I might reinforce it. People have to understand that pledge is important, that it is what takes care of our operating budget, not to the exclusion of the other things, but as a both and, truly a both and. So then you get into alms. And this is where you have mission and outreach. We happen to not have mission and outreach in our operating budget because we actually find that we have more money going to mission outreach by not having it in our operational budget, because people don't fight about, well, why are we doing this or doing that? What happens is we have a number of things. We have a fabulous mission outpost in the city down at a place called City on a Hill. We have many different things going on there, including a literacy initiative. We just helped pay for a boiler for their heating system. We got them a mode of transportation for their youth organization, just a lot of different things. And what I'll do every few times a year is say, we're going to make a special collection today and this week for an alms purpose. If this is something that speaks to your passion, we really hope that you'll open up your pocketbook. People do. Some people won't. That's okay. It's just that's how we handle it. Then you have things like capital expense. This is when, big things happen. The place needs to be painted, or the parking lot needs to be replaced, and so on. And this is where you get into capital campaigns and endowments and so on. But it's important that people understand that this is over and above pledge. If it's not stated, if it's not clear to people, they'll say, okay, well, I'll put 20,000 toward this garage or this parking lot, but I'm just going to take it out of my pledge next year. Well, then that's done nothing. We're right back to who's going to take care of the electric bill in August. And then you have designated gifts for special projects. We have a number of pass-through accounts for a variety of different things. And when people give those designated gifts, they are revenue coming into that pass-through account, and they're distributed to a specific thing. I'll give you an example. A person in our church was just adamant that we had rose-colored parament for our altar for Rose Sundays. And that's lovely. And we ended up buying this rose-colored parament, and we're going to be picking it up actually this week. It's an expensive item. It was a love for this one person that just really identifies with that for very, very good pastoral reasons. Well, that went through a pass-through account. It came in for that purpose. It went out for that purpose, and it didn't corrupt or pollute any of the books. So that segmentation, I really urge you to educate your people on it. We reinforce this. That's the other thing is we can't say things once and think that everybody's going to remember it, because it doesn't work that way. I learned that the hard way in the financial services business. We would have to remind people of things routinely. It's not an insult to say that, it's just human. Sadly, one of the greatest failings of humanity is that we forget. And so it's okay to remind. Every year at our annual appeal, we remind people of this very dynamic right here of these four things. So operating budget, super important. It has to be there, and it has to be balanced. The idea of an unbalanced budget is anathema to any kind of business organization, period. If you're a startup, okay, fine. And maybe you have some capital filled in the balance. However, the truth is that a mature organization has to operate on a balanced budget, because it turns into bad habits if they don't. That's how you get all those important things that have to be done, and not to the expense of other things, but of both and. Then you have your designated funds. Like I said, on a mission outreach, we treat it as a designated gift pass-through account. We ended up literally probably more than doubling what we did from when I first got here, more than doubling what we do on mission and outreach, because we did it this way. We had it tailored to appeal, all these different things. I'm very big personally in terms of congregational vitality. I'm very big on multiple entry points into the system. The more entry points you have in the system, the more you have the opportunity for people to really engage and say, hey, wow, that appeals to me. I really like that. So that is helpful to understand that. So here's just a little bit of inside dirt here on what I walked into 5 years ago. The budget that I had nothing to do with, I came into, literally showed a $190,000 deficit. It happened to be that there was a pile of money that was left over from the sale of a rectory that was covering that. The term that I used at some point, I'm sure in there, is absurdity, that this was just absurdity. This is not how a organization can run with any kind of sense of vitality for the present or for the future. You can see that the budget projected 190,000. We immediately started cutting a lot of expenses, many of them that just haven't been reviewed. We literally reviewed every single expense that the church had, no matter what size it was, to decide, is it something we need? Is it something we don't? And if it is something we need, can it be done in a different way? We shopped a lot of things out. We got things done for less money. And so we ended up finishing the year with a negative 120. I was still not happy with that. Going into 2018, we talked about really truly mandating a balanced budget, and we achieved it. It was a negative $3,650. That was actually a timing thing that showed up in the next year, because the next year was ahead by about $6,000. But the truth is that we dedicated ourselves to balanced budget, and we have achieved balanced budget 4 years in a row now, 2018, 2019, 2020, and we will finish 21. So here's a quiz question. Of this 2019 budget, which one of these figures is the most important figure? Anybody care to guess? You know, when everybody speaks all at once, it sounds like nobody is. I noticed that about Zoom. That's one of those peculiarities about the platform.
I'll say it's revenue.
I'm sorry?
I'll say it's revenue.
All right, thank you, sir. Revenue is very important. It's a very good, important number, but it's not the most important number of a budget. The most important number of the budget is the zero at the end.
Is the net, yes.
You see the zero? You see, income is relative. If you look at this budget in 2017, $319,000 is not a bad revenue figure. That's a decent revenue figure for a church with 350 people. However, when the total expenses are 510, then it's a train wreck. So the key is that every budget is proposed with a zero at the end of it, not a positive or a negative. Now, that sounds a little counterintuitive too. You could say, well, why wouldn't we want it to be a positive? Let's have it proposed. We're going to have a net positive $20,000. Here's the problem with that in real life, is that somebody's going to take that as a signal that, well, they don't need my 2,000. They're already ahead by 20. It's just human nature. It's just how it is. Now, it's great that we end up with a little surplus. And if we have a surplus, that's fine. What we do is we put it over to our rainy day fund. Our rainy day fund, what is the thing that was covering these losses? Well, it was beginning to turn into a rainy day for the rainy day fund, because there wasn't going to be any money left. And so we've corrected that as well, thankfully. But I say this, you know, it's more than tongue in cheek. The trick here is propose a balanced budget, zero, and just say we have to get there. It's not a choice. It's not a preference. It's a must. So here's our income budget. If you look at 2017 versus 2018, look at the big blue patch. That's pledges. So one of the things that we did in terms of proposing the balanced budget is I kind of had to make a deal with everybody, and I'm okay with that. You know, I said, I'll make a deal with all of you. We're going to raise our pledges, and I'm going to be a part of that. And I don't show the amount, but when we have our annual appeal and we're in church and everything, I just say, here is my pledge form, me and my wife. You need to know that your rector is in here with you. But that's not the only thing I'm going to do. I'm also going to go and try to find some grant money. That's my homework. And I'm going to really work at continuing to cut and trim expenses and manage things as tightly as we can. That's my homework. Your homework is to put in enough pledge money that we have a vital congregation. And so that's what happened going from 2017 to 2018, is that the pledge number is the thing that really made all the difference on the income side. But it didn't do everything, because we ended up cutting, I think it was a total of $95,000 of expenses. Some of that was stuff for the rector. Now, that sounds kind of nuts. Why would I cut some of my own stuff? But I did, because they were expenses that I really didn't need to incur. So I just lobbed them off. So this was our revenue projection for 2019. Clearly, the biggest area is pledge. The flip side to that is on the expense side, that the number is the exact same number, 415,000. And no surprise, personnel is the biggest number. It's always going to be the biggest number. Nobody should be surprised by that. Every organization, your people are going to be your biggest expense because they are your biggest asset, particularly in the business that we're in. We're in the business of communion. We're in the business of people working together. We're in the business of lifting people up. So people should be our biggest investment. But the key is the balance. It's all about the zero when it comes to that particular year. So this gets into the notion of the actual annual appeal. And what are the characteristics of the key considerations of putting together an annual appeal? The first one is that it has to be intentional. It has to be really considered to be a really important part of the life of the congregation each year. It can't be just sort of suggested, oh, we just kind of send the card out. We'll just sort of sheepishly mention it a couple times. It has to be intentional, because if it's intentional on the ask, then the natural reaction is it will be intentional on the answer. That's what we're looking for. It has to be professional. We live in a world that's very different. You know, when I grew up in this diocese, I grew up going to Christ Church. You may not know that. It's a different world. You could get by with these envelopes that would just kind of come in boxes, and they're just, you know, in monochrome, and they really don't say anything. That's not the world we live in today. If you look at the things that you get in the mail today from organizations like universities like Marquette or the medical college or the symphony or basketball teams or other kinds of entities, they really come in with a very, very professional kind of prepared appeal. It does beg the question, why should we be different? We shouldn't be different. We should be very professional. Joy-filled is super important. It's particularly important in these last 2 years. One of the things that's so critical in terms of how we communicate to our people is to say that we really are a place of joy. Our job as a church is real simple. We are there to refresh and nourish souls intentionally. We're the only entity that does that. The schools aren't going to do it. The Packers aren't going to do it. The symphony's not going to do it. They might be nourished. They might be, you know, good for the soul, so to speak, like soul food, but not intentional refreshment and soulful, work specific to the soul. But that has to be joy-filled. If it's dour, it's a turnoff. It's just a turnoff. If it comes off as we're going down for the third time, then no one should be surprised that they go down for the third time. It has to come off as this is the place for the refreshment of your soul. It has a beautiful history. And all these churches, all of them that I see your names that you have beautiful histories. Some of them are long, some of them are short. But in that history, there have been kids that have grown up, were baptized, gone on to be married, that there's an anchor in their heart and in their soul of the refreshment that they receive from that place that you are. That has to be celebrated. And then that points to the present of good vitality for the present. And then that is going to translate, hopefully, into their mind as being deserving of their resources to help it to have a great future as well. It should be systemic. It should have a systematic approach, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. I have tangible things that we do for that. And it should be personal. It should come off as, wow, this is for me. We send it in the U.S. mail. In fact, we, over the last 2 years almost now of coronavirus, have re-engaged a long-lost love affair with the U.S. Postal Service. We actually send stuff in the mail. Why? Well, if you're like me, your email is probably about double what it was coming into coronavirus. I literally get that much email. I have to budget how much I pay attention to and how much I don't. When I get things in the mail, it's a little different. And so we utilize that through coronavirus. We actually were sending things out in 5-week increments for quite a long time before we were able to open in person, because it was one appeal that one thing that we knew that they would get, and it was tangible, and they would tend to keep it. So here's what you want to avoid: the UG factor. If the pledge, if the whole stewardship campaign looks something like this thing, you're going to get these responses. That's how people are going to look at it. It's like, oh gosh, oh, here's that. Didn't we just do this, honey? Again, if I offend, I apologize, but I offend myself if because if I fall into these habits myself. You want to avoid the UG factor for sure. So let me give you an example. I'm going to give you an example of what we have done, and that means I have to minimize this guy. And there's that. Can you see my screen again? Okay. This was our annual appeal for 2020, going into 2021. So this is the one we sent out a year ago. Now keep in mind where we were a year ago.
Wait, no, we're seeing your slideshow.
I'm sorry, you still seeing the slideshow?
Yep. So I think you need to stop the share and then go back and share the screen, choosing the different one.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. See, we've already found something that Father Jeff's not that great at. Okay, so can you see it now?
Yes.
It says be the church, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here's the genesis of this. I assure you that somebody either in your church or a friend of someone that's in your church is probably a marketing person. Great person to have in this conversation. In this case, our person heads up our stewardship committee. And we sat and we collaborated. We being her, my admin chief of our admin team, myself, and a couple others. And what we did is we really tried to take a look at a moment in time. Where are we at right now? Well, if you remember a year ago, it was a pretty grim time. We were a good solid 6 months into not being in person. We were on the verge of the biggest spike of the entire coronavirus. It was, a pretty scary time. We did not want the thing that we sent out to be more scary stuff. And in fact, we had been all along, like I said, sending things in the US mail. We had a lot of things that I literally just show up at their driveway and did a lot of that. And so and part of the pastoral messaging that I had been using for a while is that during this time when we are unable to gather in person, that we lament about not going to church, but it should focus us on still being the church. And so there was a pastoral component to it, and this reflected it, but we decided to have fun with it. And so we came up with B's, and people loved it. It was a woman that came in, said, it was just fun to open. It was just a happy moment to open it in an otherwise really, really difficult time. And so we just had a lot of different theming, what's buzzing at St. Christopher's. And we decided we're going to start off by reminding them what we have done. We always want to remind our folks where we have been, because again, our greatest failing as human beings is what? We forget. We have to remind. Well, what did we do in 2020? Well, we did all of this stuff, and we did a lot of stuff. Still couldn't meet in the church, and we didn't until Easter Sunday of this year. But we kept a lot of things rolling. This woman right here, Jamie Jackson, who's holding up the thing full of grapes, put together a fabulous program for Sunday school that was part online. There was a video link sent to them every Friday, but it was also included a craft. And every 5 weeks, I'd show up at people's driveway with a bag full of 5 weeks of craft materials. Along with the other thing that they did is we paired them up with some of the older people living by themselves as pen pals, which really worked out great. So this was the first page of it, and then there was some more here about outreach in particular. We did numerous food drives. We started a blood drive for the first time ever. It was one of those grace elements. We'd been talking about doing it forever. And then around April of 2020, the Red Cross came looking, they were desperate for a place because people wouldn't let them in. And we let them in and we did it. And now we're a quarterly location every quarter for the Red Cross. And then we went into a pastoral note from the rector. That should always be in an annual appeal. The rector cannot be aloof. Now this is being recorded. Somebody can take a look at it. But I have to, and my peers, I think that they would agree with me. A rector cannot be aloof to the annual appeal. We have to be a part of it. This is the world we live in. It is goals for all of us, not just the lay people. And so this was our 2021 goals stated. Give them a name. And then some Q&A. People love FAQs. They love, hey, I have a question. Well, maybe it's on this FAQ. They will read it, and they did read it. So that was last year. Now, if I can get let's see here. Oops. I'm having a hard time because I'm going to get rid of this. All right, here we are. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, this is the new one that will be going out. We always send it out at the beginning of November. We always take 2 Sundays to talk about it, and then we put it away because we want to be done by Thanksgiving, and we certainly don't want to be, hammering this in Advent. And this year, Thanksgiving and Advent are like this. So they're Thursday, Thanksgiving, Sunday, Advent. So timing is a consideration. Keep timing in mind. So this is off at the printers right now. We decided in our little discernment committee about what we were going to do is that the place and time that we're in right now, that yes, we have been in person since April. We've had pretty good luck with that. We continue to do some outreach things for people that are not coming back yet. But most of all, we wanted to kind of celebrate this idea. It's an extension of being the church, is that we're being grateful, that we see that what we have is a bounty of blessings. And so this is the opening. This, by the way, this and the one last year is an 8x11 brochure. It's professionally printed. And this actually is an older thing. We actually changed this. Instead of "we are thankful," we put in a grateful people. But all the rest of it is pretty much the same. Once again, we reminded them, here's how the last year has gone for us. Thanks to you is really the implication, right? Thanks to your generosity, we've been able to do these things. And then pictures. Pictures tell lots and lots of stories. They are particularly important when people only interface with the church on 1 or 2 things. It's important for them to see that there are other things going on. So like this family with the bag, see that bag that he's holding in their driveway? That was a bag full of crafts for the Sunday school program. It happened to also give me an opportunity to have pastoral contact with people right in their driveway. No, I wasn't wearing a mask. Why? Because I'm outside and they're 10 feet from me. And I told them, even in coronavirus, you deserve to see your priest without a mask on his face. And they did. And we had marvelous pastoral conversations. What was really amazing to me about this, the thing that was most amazing to me, was especially early on how the entire family would come out. It's not something you would expect. You'd kind of expect one of the parents come and say, "Oh, hi, Father, thank you." Take the bag, off we go. Whole family come out to greet and to talk. I wanted to remind them of this. We had the outdoor trunk or treat event. We continued doing our mission outreach. You see wagons down there. We literally walked around the neighborhood of City on a Hill, bringing gifts and knocking on people's door and asking if we could pray for them. All these different things that were well within the confines of the time, but they were powerful and they needed to be reminded of it. And then there we go, another pastoral note from the rector. This one happens to talk about the lepers, that Jesus cures 10 of them, only one of them comes back to say thank you. Gratitude, again, should be something that we live, something that guides our entire attitude. And then the goals for 2022, pretty simple, straightforward bullets. Now you'll notice in here one little sneaky thing, little sneaky trick that that was my doing. I told Ann, our marketing person, I said, I love the bees so much. I want you to sneak one bee into this thing somewhere. And there he is right down on the bottom. So we wanted to have a little bit of an echo of the bees. FAQ, sometimes things change. And most importantly, a really nice form for them to complete. What's really interesting, particularly last year with the bees, we'll see how it is this year, but we had people that had been going to the church for decades that never filled out a pledge form before. Always thought the pledge card was kind of like, whatever, here's a check. Would fill out this form. Because it's personal, it appeals to them. It has a professional quality. It's synonymous with what they get from other organizations. They were happy to send it in. And it had a stamped return reply envelope in it. Effortless. Fill it out, send it in. And I always encourage people, A, to pledge and to fill out the form. And we make sure people understand we're not talking about a blood oath here. If something happens, obviously we're not going to be coming to search for the money. We have to assure them of that. But it's important that people pledge. It's important that people are really truly invested in the vitality of this place, that it is their faith home. And so I really encourage them. And I say, fill out the form. If even if, if you can't afford $1, I'll give you $1. Just fill out a form. Anything to be a part of the communion. And people responded to it. So then we also had, this gets into the whole systemic thing, beginning, middle, end. We send out the forms, we speak to it in church. Then when they send in their pledge, this is a thank you card. It just folds over. I write a handwritten thank you card to every pledge that comes in. This is where it's important that your rector is involved. And, sometimes people look and say, well, we don't want, we don't want our rector to know, they might give pastoral preferential treatment to somebody giving more money. Well, that's not a problem with business. That's a problem with pastoral concern. Of course, we shouldn't do that. I think every priest I know in this diocese would not give one iota less pastoral attention to someone who gives $1 versus someone who gives $10,000. The most important thing is that the gratitude is there, that we thank them. Thank you very much for your pledge. It is through your generosity that we are able to continue doing what we do. This is the envelope it comes in. That's another part of it. This is how it's presented. It's kind of like when you go to a restaurant, what makes the restaurant so special? Sometimes it's not the food, because your spouse could probably make something better. But the truth is that a lot of times it's in the presentation. It's how they hand it to you. When they get this envelope in the mail with the big brochure on the inside, it's like it's begging them to open it. So I want you to open me. Please open me. That's where you want them to start. And then they read through and they have the return envelope. They send the envelope in with their check or their promise for, future, however they're going to pay. And then they get a thank you note from the rector. It's a process. It really is truly about process. So I'm going to stop there. We are at 7:47, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. And but this is what we have come up with. It works for us. There may be a variation that would work for your church, and I'm always happy to talk to anybody about what that might look like for you. And I see Doug has raised his hand. Hi, Doug.
All right. I do not want to dwell on the revenue side to prove I'm right. Trust me when I say that's not my point. But
Okay.
if I look at your numbers from the expenses that you cut without the increase in revenue, you would have never made zero.
Yes. No, you're 100% right on that. You have to have the revenue. And I'm not engaging a sleight of hand to say that the revenue number is not an important number. It clearly is. The revenue number is an important number. The expense number is an important number. The most important number, though, for ongoing vitality is the zero that it balances, because the revenue could be $1 million, but if you spend $2 million, you're going to be out of business. And no organization can sustain negative deficits year after year and remain a vital organization. It's only a matter of time. And the problem with deficits is that it's a slippery slope of habit. Once you have a deficit, it's like, well, okay, well, maybe next year's deficit will be less. Well, how about in the following year? Well, I don't know. We might have to jump it back up. The problem is that takes on a life of its own. And this is where you get into the cultural shift, is to say, we're going to have a balanced budget. I mean, no matter what it takes, we're just going to do it. It does mean that people have to step up and increase, their pledge in many cases. I can tell you honestly, Doug, in going into 2018, for the annual appeal that we did then, that annual appeal was, the title of it was Church for a Lifetime. And it talked about church for their lifetime, and it talked about the lifetime of the church itself. And I told the congregation in church myself with my little envelope in my hand, I said, I'm asking you this one time to increase your pledge by 25%. And I said, I know that's a big number. And my envelope right here is 25% more than what I came in with in 2017. I said, I'm not going to ask you for 25% increase every year. Don't worry about that. Next year will be 50, right? No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. But I didn't come in. I afterward, I said, once we did that, and do you know that our pledges increased 22%? That's what made the difference, along with saving a lot of money on a lot of things that just needed to be repriced and gotten rid of, and duplications and things of that nature. So I respect that. Yes, obviously revenue, incredibly important. Otherwise, there's no expenses that can be paid without the revenue. But if it is not balanced, then it's a slippery slope. Tends to be a matter of time. If it's digging into endowments to pay for operational expenses, which they're really not meant to do, unless they are meant to do, we do have a program called urging people to endow their pledge. And we have had that happen in an endowment that does spin off specifically to and for operations, but mostly our base endowment is for capital expenditures. And that's what keeps us being able to, put $90,000 into the HVAC system, which, I wanted to cry about when I wrote that check. But I do, again, I don't say this to jar or offend. It's just, I think that it gets to, this is true culture shift, not strategy. Although there's some cool strategy put into it too.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Jennifer.
I just wanted to let everyone know that you had come to St. Matthew's. We had a Zoom meeting with you.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And I can tell you that we did present our unbalanced budget to our congregation in last year. And we are striving so hard to make our balanced budget, to make everything kind of work. Our pledges are up. We haven't taken anything out of endowments as of right now. We have not taken a penny, which historically we have in order to cover. And so I did want to say to everyone here that what Father Ward gave us was hope. He gave us a way to say, okay, we can do this. We can turn the ship around. And we're currently looking for a rector, but we are still, just on Sunday, we confirmed, baptized, and received 9 new members into our church. So,
Wow.
yes, we were so excited.
Good for you. That's awesome.
So,
Wow.
and last year, I don't know if you remember, but we were almost out of hope because we were just
Oh, I remember. Yeah, we had a couple meetings. Yeah.
Yes. So I did want to say thank you in this public space. Sorry about that, but
Well, no, thank you. I appreciate that because that, it speaks to the notion of vitality. It speaks to the notion of people buying in. People
Yes.
will buy in to excitement, joy, future vitality. They will buy into that. I promise you that. What they won't buy into is scarcity. Oh my gosh, we're going down for the 3rd time. If you don't up your pledge, we're going to be out of business. Nobody is going to want to invest in that. They just aren't. It's just human nature. And, and there was a guy that told me famously one time, he said, all of these churches, you all have all the money that you need. It's just in other people's checkbook right now.
Mhm.
That's the way to look at it. It is not the scarcity is an illusion. There's no need for the scarcity. I grew up in this church. I loved being an Episcopalian. We at Christ Church, it was a vibrant place. And it wasn't just Christ Church. It was all the churches. I remember going to lock-ins and Happening and Camp Webb and all these things. Now, of course, we're living in a little bit of a different world. We can't do things exactly the same. However, although those churches, those people were my friends. It didn't matter if they were in North Lake or Menominee Falls. I've been in all of those churches over the years. I just loved being a part of it. And we have to really tap into that. And that's why I say you have to remind people of the goodness. You can't take it for granted. You can't send out the UGG factor card or you're going to get an UGG factor. You have to come through with a sense of vitality and energy. And when you do, they will respond, and they'll do it gladly. Any other questions? Well, I invite you to call me anytime. I'm serious about that. I'll be happy to talk to you. Be happy to show you anything that we have. Be happy to have you replicate it for yourself. Like I say, this is not an intellectual property exercise. This is an exercise of communion. And I read a beautiful meditation the other day from Richard Rohr. And I read his stuff fairly often. And he talked about the idea of communion. And, we think of it as, come to church and we gather around the table and we have the wafer and we have a lot of sacramental beliefs about it. But communion is actually much bigger than that. It's in everything that we do. It's in how we're connected. And part of how we're connected is, in fact, through resources. We can't be sheepish about it. It just is part of how we're connected. It can't be all of how we're connected because then we're just greedy. But it is a very important part of how we're connected. Otherwise, we can look at the long list, sadly, too long of a list of churches in the Diocese of Milwaukee that no longer exist because it came from, they were coming from a place of scarcity and it killed them. That isn't you. It really isn't. It's you can do it. And we're glad to help you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back
Thank
over
you
to Sarah.
so much, Father Geoff, for joining us tonight. The thing that I see across both of the samples that you showed is the general principle is the same, and the frilly stuff is different. But there's
Right.
guiding principles that really carry it through that I resonate with people.
Thank you.
We will reconvene the third week in November. I think that is November 18th. And next month you get me. I will be talking about communications. If there's anything, website or newsletter, things like that you want me to focus on, send me a message and I'll be happy to tie that in. Thank you so much for coming tonight. You will get an email with the slides and with the recording tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.